Are you a literate girl? The question landed in the opulent silence of Lucille Etoile, like a shard of glass. It wasn't a genuine inquiry. It was a weapon, honed by generations of privilege and designed to cut. Every whisper in the dining room ceased. The gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain froze. A man halfway, through lifting a wine glass to his lips, held it suspended in the air, his eyes wide. The entire restaurant, a gilded cage of old money and new power, held its breath. At the center of it all stood Chloe, a 23-year-old woman in a starched black uniform, her posture a perfect, unmoving line of dignity. Before her sat Mrs. Hannah Min, a vision of cruel elegance in a black silk dress that seemed to drink the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Her diamonds were like chips of ice on her throat and wrists. Across the table, her husband, Mr. Jun Min, remained a statue of stone and steel, his face impassive, his gaze fixed on nothing. He was a man whose stillness was more menacing than any movement. Mrs. Min's lips, painted a vicious shade of crimson, twisted into a smirk. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the menu, its heavy cream cardstock embossed with swirling gold script. This is a list of food. In a restaurant. In America. Yet it is covered in this. This chicken scratch. I asked you a simple question. What is the potage parmentier? And you just stand there. So I ask again. Are you stupid or simply illiterate? The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was an accusation meant to strip Chloe of her personhood, to reduce her to a functional object that had malfunctioned. It was a public execution of status. Chloe didn't work at Lucille Etoile because she loved the cloying scent of truffle oil or the condescending smiles of its patrons. She worked there because her grandmother, the woman who had raised her on stories of gods and heroes, was slowly being stolen by a disease that cost more per month than Chloe's entire university tuition. By day, Chloe was a ghost in the hallowed halls of a top-tier university, a linguistics prodigy on a full scholarship. She didn't study French or Spanish. She studied the dead and the dying. Ugaritic cuneiform, Proto-Indo-European roots, the symbolic logic of forgotten scripts. Her mind was a museum of lost languages. She possessed a rare, frighteningly powerful form of eidetic memory, but it wasn't just for images. She saw text as architecture. Paragraphs were blueprints, sentences were load-bearing walls, and individual letters were the unique, irreplaceable bricks. A glance was all it took. The text was absorbed, cataloged, and stored in a flawless mental archive. She could recall the exact kerning on a forgotten manuscript she'd seen once in a dusty library book 5 years ago. This job, with its silent rules and rigid choreography, was a place to hide. A place to be invisible while she earned the money that kept her grandmother's heart beating. She was an observer by nature, a collector of details. She noticed the faint tremor in the hand of the stockbroker in corner booth 6, the way the politician at table 3 angled his body away from his wife when he thought no one was looking. And she had noticed, with crystalline clarity, the moment the mints had arrived. Mr. Min's heavy leather briefcase had clicked open for less than a second as he retrieved his phone. It was just enough time for Chloe's eyes to scan the top page of a document inside. She didn't just see words, she saw the entire structure. The formal header, the dense block of legalese, the stark, unforgiving title. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Mrs. Min was not finished. The silence of the room was not a deterrent. It was an audience. Look at her, she said, her voice rising, each word a carefully polished stone thrown at Chloe. Just a blank face. No sots. No understanding. This is what the city has come to. They let anyone serve the public. They don't even check if they can read. She gestured dismissively at Chloe's uniform. This is supposed to be a fine establishment. But how can it be when the help is defective? The manager, Antoine, a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin, began to scurry over, his face pale with panic. Madam Min, my deepest apologies. Is there something I can? Mrs. Min cut him off with a flick of her wrist, a gesture that was both elegant and utterly contemptuous. You can fire her. And then you can find someone who can translate your ridiculous menu into a language civilized people speak. Her focus returned to Chloe, her eyes narrowing with a predator's glee. She was enjoying this. The power, the attention, the sheer, intoxicating pleasure of reducing another human being to dust. "Tell me, girl," she purred, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Can you even spell your own name? Or do you just make a little X on your paycheck?" Mr. Min did not move. His silence was an endorsement. He watched Chloe, his eyes dark and unreadable, like polished river stones. He wasn't observing his wife's tantrum. He was observing Chloe's reaction. He was gauging her breaking point. The entire room was a jury, and Chloe was on trial for the crime of being a servant in the presence of her masters. Every second that ticked by was another layer of humiliation, pressing down on her, meant to crush her. Chloe did not break. She did not cry. She did not even flinch. For a long, stretched-out moment, she simply held Mrs. Min's gaze. And in that silence, a profound shift occurred. The quiet, deferential waitress vanished. In her place was something else, something cold and precise. It was the scholar, the analyst, the woman who could dissect a forgotten language down to its bones. Her mind replayed the image of the document in the briefcase. The header, the font, the spacing. She saw it all. Paragraph 1, Section C, Clause 4. The architecture of the text was flawless in her memory. Then she moved. Her motion was fluid and deliberate, devoid of anger or fear. It was the movement of pure purpose. Her hand reached across the table, not for a water glass, not for a plate, but for the pen lying beside Mr. Min's placemat. It was a fountain pen, heavy and black with a silver nib, an instrument of power and signature. Her fingers closed around it. No one breathed. She then took the menu, the source of the insult, and turned it over. The back was a pristine canvas of thick, creamy paper. She uncapped the pen. The click was the only sound in the vast, silent room. With the silver nib hovering over the paper, she looked one last time at Mrs. Min. Then she began to draw. It wasn't writing, not at first. It was a diagram. A perfect, miniature replica of the top section of the legal document she had seen. She drew a box for the header, 2 parallel lines for the title. Then, beneath it, she began to write. Her penmanship was not the hurried scrawl of a waitress taking an order. It was a masterclass in calligraphy, each letter a perfect, balanced stroke. She didn't write the whole paragraph. She didn't need to. She wrote only the heart of it, the single, venomous clause that mattered. Any public disturbance, display of temper, or action resulting in social disgrace attributable to the respondent within the 6-month probationary period shall trigger an immediate and non-negotiable reduction of the spousal settlement by an amount equal to 80%. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of shocked fascination. It was the deafening roar of a vacuum, the sound of all power shifting from one side of the table to the other. Mrs. Min's face, which had been a mask of triumphant cruelty, crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed horror. The perfectly applied lipstick now looked like a wound. She recognized the words. She knew them intimately. They were the bars of her gilded cage, the poison in her golden chalice. Her eyes darted from the menu to her husband's face, searching for a denial, an intervention, anything. But Mr. Min's expression had changed. The impassivity was gone, replaced by a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like respect. His gaze was fixed on Chloe, a cold, analytical appraisal. He had just witnessed a servant girl disarm his wife more effectively than any lawyer ever could, using nothing but a pen and a perfect memory. Chloe placed the heavy fountain pen down on the table, setting it perfectly parallel to the edge of the menu. The gesture was final, like a judge laying down a gavel. She raised her eyes to meet Mrs. Min's, her expression calm, her voice even and quiet, yet it carried across the silent room like a bell. "Would you like me to translate the coke oven for you now, madam?" she asked. "Or perhaps," she paused, letting the words hang in the air, "you've lost your appetite." It was a checkmate delivered with devastating politeness. Mr. Min made his decision. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod in Chloe's direction. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a salute from one predator to another. He rose from his chair, his large frame commanding the space. He reached into his jacket, produced a black, featureless credit card, and placed it on the table. For the first time that evening, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "We will be leaving." He turned his gaze upon his wife, and for the first time, it held a visible emotion: utter contempt. Now, he walked away without a backward glance, leaving his wife to gather the shattered pieces of her public face. The next afternoon, Chloe was polishing silverware in the back of the restaurant when Antoine, the manager, approached her. His usual frantic energy was gone, replaced by a kind of nervous reverence. "Chloe," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "There is a gentleman here to see you." In my office, Chloe felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. It was over. Mr. Min was tying up loose ends. A girl who knew that much was a liability. She expected a threat, a payoff, a warning to disappear. She followed Antoine to the small, cluttered office. Sitting in the worn visitor's chair was not Mr. Min, but a younger man in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to have been woven onto his body. He was sharp, precise, and his eyes missed nothing. He stood as she entered. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice smooth and formal. "My name is Daniel Park. I am legal counsel for Mr. Min." He gestured for her to sit. "I am not here to cause you any trouble." Quite the opposite, Chloe remained standing. "What do you want?" Mr. Park allowed a small, thin smile. "My employer was impressed last night, not by your defiance, but by your precision, by your memory, and most of all, by your discretion. You held a weapon that could have destroyed a reputation, and you used it only as a shield, not as a sword. That shows." Restraint, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Mr. Min's business interests are global and complex. We often deal with contracts, historical deeds, and communications that are intentionally obscure. They are written in multiple languages, filled with coded phrases, and sometimes rely on interpretations of texts centuries old. We require a particular kind of analyst." Chloe understood immediately. This wasn't a threat. It was a job offer. "You want me to translate for you?" "No," Mr. Park corrected gently. "We have translators. We need someone who can see the architecture of information. Someone who can spot a lie written in a dead language. Someone who understands that a single misplaced symbol in a 1,000-page document can mean the difference between a billion-dollar asset and a worthless piece of paper." He slid a plain white envelope across the desk. "This is a retainer. It is more than this restaurant will pay you in a decade. If you accept, you will work for us as an independent consultant. Your university fees will be handled. The care for your grandmother will be the best available." Anywhere, the stakes of her life had just been rewritten. It was a dangerous, terrifying leap into a world she knew nothing about, but it was also the only path to the one thing she truly cared about: her grandmother's future. Chloe accepted. Her transition from the world of starched aprons to sterile boardrooms was jarring. She was taken not to a gleaming skyscraper, but to a discreet, unmarked building in the city's financial district. The office she was shown to was less an office and more a vault. Soundproofed walls, a single large desk with a powerful computer terminal, and a library of digital archives that would make a university jealous. Her first assignment was a test. Mr. Park placed a tablet on her desk. On the screen was a high-resolution image of a fragment of a document, written in a 16th-century Basque dialect layered with Latin legal phrases. "This is a land grant," he explained. "It pertains to a significant mineral deposit. 3 different experts have given us 3 different interpretations of the ownership clause. We believe one of them is deliberately misleading." "Find it." Chloe felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was her world. The noise and pressure of the outside vanished. There was only the text, the patterns, the history embedded in the shape of each letter. She worked for 7 hours without a break. She didn't just translate the words. She analyzed the scribal hand, identifying an inconsistency in the pressure of the quill on a single word. She cross-referenced the legal phrasing with Roman property laws that were still influential in that region at the time. She delved into the university's deepest digital archives, pulling up folk histories and local religious texts from the period. The answer, she discovered, was not in what was written, but in what was omitted. A specific Latin conjunction had 2 meanings, and or, depending on the context. The ambiguity was deliberate, but in a local religious text from the same decade, she found a parable that used the exact same grammatical structure to illustrate the concept of indivisible ownership. It was a cultural key, a Rosetta Stone for this single, crucial sentence. The land grant didn't give ownership to the family or the church. It bound them together. Neither could sell without the other. The loophole was a cage. She wrote up her analysis, a concise, 3-page report that was brutally efficient. She cited her sources, explained the linguistic trap, and concluded with the strategic implications. She sent it to Mr. Park. An hour later, Mr. Min himself entered her office. He held the tablet with her report on it. He looked at her, his face as impassive as ever, but his eyes held that same flicker of cold appraisal she had seen in the restaurant. "You've done in 7 hours what teams of lawyers couldn't do in a month," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact. "Your probationary period is over. Welcome to the organization." Chloe had passed the test. Her value had been quantified and confirmed. She was no longer just a girl with a good memory. In this world, she was a precision instrument. The next few months were a blur of intellectual challenges. Chloe decrypted coded financial communications, authenticated ancient artifacts by analyzing the linguistics of their inscriptions, and found fatal flaws in ironclad international contracts. The money that flowed into her account was staggering. She moved her grandmother into a state-of-the-art private care facility, a place with sunlit rooms, gentle nurses, and the best doctors money could buy. For the first time in years, Chloe felt a sense of peace. She had built a fortress of security around the only person who mattered to her. She believed she had won, but she had underestimated the venom of a woman scorned. Hannah Min, stripped of her public standing and facing a humiliating divorce, had not disappeared. She had been festering, plotting. Unable to strike at her powerful husband, she focused all her hatred on the source of her downfall, the waitress. She couldn't use force or money in the same way her husband could. So she chose a different weapon, the bureaucracy of the state. An anonymous, carefully worded tip was sent to the university's financial aid office, alleging that Chloe had falsified information on her scholarship application. Another tip, filled with fabricated details of neglect and elder abuse, was sent to the state's Adult Protective Services, naming Chloe and the new care facility. The attacks were insidious, designed to drown her in paperwork and suspicion. The university, bound by its own rigid protocols, immediately froze her scholarship funds pending a full investigation. The care facility was forced to open a case file, and suddenly, Chloe's visits with her grandmother were supervised, her every interaction noted by a suspicious social worker. Her new wealth, which she had declared legally, became a point of accusation rather than a sign of success. Where did this money come from? How could a student suddenly afford this level of care? The system, designed to protect the vulnerable, was twisted into a weapon against her. Mrs. Min had found her weak point. Not her mind, not her skills, but her heart. The fortress Chloe had built was being dismantled from the inside out, brick by bureaucratic brick. Chloe knew instantly who was responsible. The precision of the attack, its simultaneous assault on her academic and personal life, had Hannah Min's vindictive signature all over it. Mr. Park, on behalf of Mr. Min, offered to make it all go away. "We have people who can handle these administrative problems," he said, his tone suggesting a solution that was both swift and permanent. Say the word, Chloe was tempted. A part of her, weary and frightened, wanted to unleash the immense, shadowy power she now had access to. But she refused. This was not Mr. Min's battle. This was hers. Using his methods would be an admission of defeat, a concession that she was no different from them. She would win this on her own terms, with her own weapons. Information, logic, and the truth. She used the organization's resources, but not its muscle. She requested access to every digital file they had on Hannah Min financial records, communication logs, social calendars, a life documented in data. She wasn't looking for a single piece of evidence, a smoking gun. She was looking for a pattern, the underlying architecture of a person's malice. For 3 days, she slept only in brief increments, her eyes glued to the screen. She built a timeline of Mrs. Min's life, cross-referencing her social appearances with anonymous complaints filed against business rivals, disgruntled staff, and even former friends. A pattern emerged, clear and terrifying. A caterer publicly shamed for a minor error was hit with an anonymous health code violation the next day. A valet who scratched her car was arrested a week later on a false tip for theft. It was a sociopathic tapestry of petty revenge, orchestrated through private investigators and burner phones. And then Chloe found it. Deep in the phone records of a disgraced private investigator Mrs. Min had used for years was a single audio file, mislabeled and forgotten. It was a recording of a call. Hannah Min's voice, disguised but unmistakable, detailing the fabricated story of elder abuse to the anonymous tip hotline. Chloe now had the sword. The final confrontation was not in an alley or a boardroom, but in a sterile conference room at the university. It was a formal hearing of the Academic Integrity Board. To Chloe's surprise, Mrs. Min was there, having manipulated her way into attending as a concerned citizen and a supposed witness to Chloe's unexplained wealth. She sat there, radiating smug righteousness, ready to watch Chloe's life be torn apart. The board members, grim-faced and serious, asked Chloe to respond to the allegations. Chloe stood. She didn't address the board. She addressed Hannah Min. "You've built your life on the belief that you can control the story," Chloe began, her voice steady and clear. "That you can erase people with whispers and lies." She placed a sleek, black audio player on the table. "But you can't erase a recording." The room was utterly still. Chloe pressed play. Hannah Min's voice, thin and distorted but undeniably hers, filled the conference room, spitting out the vile, calculated lies about Chloe and her grandmother. The board members stared, their expressions shifting from stern judgment to open-mouthed shock. Mrs. Min's face went white. She tried to speak, to deny it, but no words came out. A strangled gasp was all she could manage. But Chloe wasn't finished. She projected a timeline onto the wall screen. It was a web of deceit, connecting a dozen different anonymous tips, legal complaints, and acts of harassment over 5 years to a single source, Hannah Min. There were financial records showing payments to private investigators, email metadata, cell tower data. It was an overwhelming, irrefutable monument to her cruelty. "This was never about my scholarship," Chloe said, her voice ringing with cold fury. "It was about you being humiliated in a restaurant. You couldn't stand that a waitress, a black woman you had already dismissed as illiterate, had more power in that moment than you did. So you tried to burn down my life to feel tall again." The lead board member, a stern history professor, looked at Mrs. Min with undisguised disgust. "This hearing is over," he announced. "Miss Evans, the allegations against you are dismissed with our sincerest apologies. The university would be honored to offer you a full research fellowship to continue your graduate work." He then turned to the university's legal counsel. "And I believe we have a case for slander. At the very least." The final blow came quietly. A man who had been sitting silently in the back of the room stood up. It was Daniel Park. He walked to the table and placed a single file in front of the university's lawyer. "We'll be handling the legal proceedings on Miss Evans' behalf," he said smoothly. "And this dossier, along with the recording, will be forwarded to the judge presiding over the Min divorce case. I believe it qualifies as a public action resulting in social disgrace, the 80% clause." The final nail in the coffin. Hannah Min didn't scream or rage. She simply collapsed in on herself, a hollowed-out shell of a woman, finally and irrevocably defeated. The last image Chloe had of her was of a security guard gently leading her from the room, a fallen queen with no kingdom left to rule. The war was over. Chloe had won, not by stooping to her enemy's level, but by rising above it, armed with nothing but the truth. The victory was absolute, and it was hers alone.